normally do, and then we'll kick it off. All right, so welcome everybody to another round of Open Game Data Open Office Hours. So just a reminder, this Open Game Data community, wow, come on, there we go, is an NSF-funded research incubator designed to bring together a collective of researchers who are interested in the use of data generated in and around games to advance our scientific understanding of learning, thinking, and decision-making. And we have two primary goals here. One is to convene that community in general, give them a place to talk, share ideas. And then the other one is to build